So I'm just going to take attendance real quick, see who's all here, and then I'm going to start up. Today we're going to go through a lecture on our next area of content. And then I'm going to go over the final, it's not really a final project, but the last project we're doing. It's another drawing, but this time it'll be based on vectors. And then there'll probably be some time left over at the end of class. You guys can start working on the new project, or if you wanted, I can also help anybody out with the third project. So we'll have a few minutes for that. And we officially have 3 weeks class left. That is it. Is anybody here having troubles and wants to get some help with their processing? Kind of get an idea. If you want to just put it in the chat, or yeah, maybe just put it in the chat so I have an idea. And everybody's still coming in. Okay, I think I got everybody. Somebody just dropped out though. Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen here. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Okay. Like this full screen, it looks like. So today we're going over a few different things. I still have the vocab for the last section on here. I had enough going on trying to get the class moved over and catching up myself, so I didn't try to do any type of online quizzing. I know most people just like, you know, open book style it anyway, so what's the point? So we don't have any final quizzes or anything, but I think you guys should still check this out. If you have a printer, maybe just print it, because ideally these different terms really help you out in terms of really grasping the content a lot better. So I I took the time to make sure this is all updated every semester, or every year, I should say. I don't know if I looked at this one in particular over again, but anyway. So vocab 5 is still on there, and different things that are covered there pair with my lecture. So I don't sit there and define every kind of vocab word that we're going to be using, like baseline, so it's going to be good for you guys to still educate yourself on that. For homework, you guys will need to watch this Helvetica movie. So even if you've watched it before, it's good to refresh, because they go over a lot of visual references for projects that you could potentially use, or steal components of the works they show. So I did get the library to host this for us. It wasn't on there before. So it's with Canopy, I guess. Canopy? I don't know. This is our library service. So you guys should be able to just sign in to watch it. I'm just hitting play. Does it play? Yeah, so I don't know if it's because I've already signed in the past. Doesn't show that I'm signed in right now, but anyhow, you guys all have access to this movie at home, and it's a pretty decent one to watch with anybody who's who likes art, design, fashion. So you can watch it with your family or whatever if you would like. It's a decent one. And then a couple questions for you for the blog and replying that movie. Kind of get your mind working, retaining some of the knowledge you've seen in the movie, and really just kind of easy points for your average as well. And then before our next class as well, you'll want to have your project proposal. And so this proposal is going to really stem from not just the stuff I cover in this lecture, and I'm going to go over the project itself, but then it's really going to be up to you guys to do some research. And by research, I really mean like browsing different sources, different sites, magazines, as well as taking influence from the movie. So I don't expect everybody, even after I go over the lecture and the assignment, some of you are probably still going to be confused. And after you watch the Helvetica movie, things will start to click into place. I promise you. So let's dive into this lecture here. Shouldn't take too long. And I have to do 2 screens. Let me double check something here. Participants. Okay, I just wanted to mute somebody because I have background noise coming in. Okay, so I have to play my little game of running 2 computers at the same time here. So, and I'll try to face this one because then you see me talking to you more so. This program that we're going to be using is Illustrator. Most people in my class, or most of my classes, ends up being like a quarter of people have used Illustrator in the past. Usually only like 3 or 4, maybe have used it for beyond like one small project. So whether you've used it before or not, you know, try to challenge yourself to. If you used it before, challenge yourself to kind of learn more new things, ask new questions, that sort of thing. I've used Illustrator quite a lot. I haven't used a lot of the new CC because I just got it on. I just subscribed to CC this semester myself, so I'm going to dive in a little bit more. Some of the new features are just like time-saving tools, more complex tools, I suppose, as well, that potentially are more useful in generating creative, like what's an example? Like more advanced gradients. What else? I'm blanking. I only checked out a couple things last semester. So anyhow, I'll have to kind of go back through and check out some of those new features. But yeah, so this lecture is going to kind of get us up to speed on the differences of like what we did drawing with Photoshop and moving in towards this lecture or this mindset of using vectors. So kind of go through visual examples here. And I don't know if this is all going to play out the same way. But anyway, technical things on my end. So here we can see the same image in 2 different ways. And it's blatantly obvious that the left one is more clear, it's vector based. And the right one has been pixelated. Well, in all reality, I started this image out. I found this online, right? This image. It looked like the clarity of the left one, but then I expanded the size, the resolution of it on the right for the raster, which is why it looks pixelated. It might not look as pixelated if you're on a small screen, but... And then the one that's vectorized, I actually brought it into Illustrator and converted it to vector points. So vectors are these little anchor points that you can see, little dots outlining different shapes, different strokes, and the whole image is based on these points, these plotted points. So instead of individual pixels that have a color assigned to that pixel, your image is based off of these individual points and the curves in between the points. And then if you have these points trailing along with one another to form a solid shape, then the program can know to fill that shape with a color and so forth. So there's a lot of nice differences or like reasonings why you would use one over the other, and that's what we're going to talk about, and hopefully find a form, like more of a basis of why we're going to be using this as a program for your projects. So, vectors are just these mathematically defined individual plotted points. They're not resolution dependent. So I always breeze right over this, and in the quiz I've always quizzed on this point as well, and it's usually like half the people don't get it right, and I've just been thinking, well, maybe I'm just going a little bit too quick over this point. So and I was thinking about asking you guys questions. I'm just going to break it down a little bit more. So resolution dependent is what Photoshop was based on. right? We set a specific resolution, right? We set the dimensions of the window. We set the PPI, the pixels per inch, and then based on those two parameters, we get the total pixels wide and pixels tall, right? That image is then dependent on those pixels. It's dependent on that resolution that you set, right? Say if you have that image and you export it as a JPEG, and then you blow it up to be a poster, a large poster on the wall, it's probably going to be a little bit pixelated. Why? Because it's dependent on resolution, right? These mathematical points of vectors, they are not dependent on that resolution. So you can change your images, scale them up or down without losing quality. And the mindset that I always like to instill with you guys to remember this point is, with vectors, you could have something that's a small graphic, like on a business card, a little logo in a corner, and you could scale it up to a billboard size and it would still look sharp, right? I mean, there's some technical components to that, but that's the overall mentality, is that you're able to scale things up or down because you're just changing where those points are on a grid, right? We've been using processing, and you move points over, you're moving the image over, you scale it out, it'll scale out. That's what we're dealing with here. So it's a little weird for me because I've always taught this before processing, but still use that mentality here as well. So this is kind of giving you an idea of like why you would use one over another. Vector shapes tend to be characterized by these large open areas, solid areas of color or gradients, and a lot of lines. They end up taking up very small storage space compared to raster. And the reasoning, and this is changing obviously as the programs are getting more complex and the settings that you have, different tools and features you have available to you that might do special effects, like drop shadows and 3D rendering effects, and those take up more space than they have in the past. But in general, a raster image has to save every single pixel with every single color, whereas here we're only saving where these vectors are landing and the color that is being applied to the stroke or the fill. So vectors usually end up being more preferred for logos, anything that you can think of that is going to be resized a lot, right? So if you go out and end up doing freelance design stuff, which in general out of a whole class like this, usually 1 to 3 people, I would say, ends up saying, oh, okay, I need to make some money this summer. How do I make money? Well, maybe you find a business or somebody who's needing some kind of work done, digital work, and you can make them a logo, right? Things to think about though is like, where is this logo going to be placed on, right? If they literally only are ever going to use it on their website and they're adamant, like, no, I never want to put it on a business card. No, I never want to print out a billboard or a sign to put up somewhere, then maybe that's a raster-based image that you can make. Ultimately, though, you want to have the flexibility. So being able to command programs that work with vector are going to give you that flexibility that most people end up needing. So this will be a good one for you guys to learn, kind of just for spare kind of freelance jobs, being able to kind of navigate different types of work. So this is another visual example of talking about vectors. So, in Photoshop, if we zoomed way in, we'd end up getting like every square pixel with a different color. Here, as we zoom in, it's just getting larger. We're not actually pixelating anything here, right? And this is the point, kind of trying to get across. So the program file itself, the extension is .ai, and obviously this was developed by Adobe, and the whole purpose is supposed to be for single-page vector drawings. I'm not sure in my mind, thinking like, well, what would a multi-page vector drawing be? My only thought would be like three-dimensional work. So the programming language that this uses, which technically you do have access to utilizing, like you could now in Photoshop and I believe in Illustrator and these different Adobe programs, I do believe they're being more welcoming to injecting code as a way of working for creativity or workflow, what have you. But PostScript is the programming language, and this is for defining the vector points. PostScript is used in a lot of these programs for vector work. And what's interesting is, like Affinity Designer is another bigger program. I actually have only used Affinity Designer for like a 3-day weekend. I was doing like a test hire at some design company that made signs, and they use Affinity Designer. It was weird because the tools are different, the workflow is different, but it still uses these points. So the interesting point here, though, is PostScript itself, this is .ps, but in reality, I've never seen people utilize that. If you're going to be saving a file and want to share it to somebody, and you have no idea what kind of program they have, then the best chance is to send them an EPS file. It could be similar as a PDF. PDFs do retain the ability to save vector data. So PDFs can be just fine. However, people that do design, they're going to be able to utilize an EPS file. It's kind of more of a streamlined workflow, I guess. I don't really know. Like, if I were doing a project with other people and it's all vector based, I'd prefer just ease of mind, I guess, knowing that the vector data is going to be saved properly in the EPS file, whereas the PDF, you'd have to make sure settings are set correctly. And but so that's what I'm going to be preferring you guys to upload your projects, like when you're finishing project 4. Upload like your Illustrator file so I can grade it, but also an EPS file. So just as like a way of getting the experience. And there's another layer to that I'll be going over too. Probably when we get into our demo or our exercise day, kind of talk a little bit more about program types and legacy formats and that sort of thing. So yeah, but this EPS file, it could be opened up in InDesign, Photoshop, Affinity Designer supposedly, and it can contain raster information as well, just like a PDF. This is going back over just this concept of RGB, which is for screen-based, and CMYK, which is for print. There's also now getting into like design methodologies here. Spot color is a different set of libraries that people can use for creating. And you want to ultimately, when you get into going to do a project, right, you want to know what's the outcome of this project. And so if you know it's going to be printed in a specific way, you're going to have to choose your colors accordingly. And so they do have different libraries for this sort of thing. And I'm going to be talking about the options here. So in reality, this program, Illustrator, is used quite often for a lot of people for just design in general. People like to use the text-based tools in here, and that's good enough for them. I personally have learned more in not Illustrator, in InDesign. So I like to do all my text-based, design stuff in InDesign. But a lot of people skip InDesign and just do everything right here, like poster design, graphic design stuff. So anyhow, in the settings here, up under Window, we have swatch libraries, and as you can see, there's a ton of different options. Well, actually, you can't see the same thing on my screen here, but under color books, there's these different Pantone libraries, but there's a ton more options. And if I scrub to here, you can see this is just an example of one library. And can you guys see my mouse here? Can't quite tell.
Yeah, we could see your mouse.
Okay, yeah. I assumed, but I was on a different screen on my other computer.
Yeah.
That's not what I want. So there's this ability to scroll up and down. So there's a ton of swatches here inside of this library, this Pantone library. And so the whole point of these are that if you're collaborating with different people, more professionally for like a design firm, ultimately this is a way of, better organizing your own content. So when it comes time to expand or collaborate on a project down the road, you have everything already set. Or literally, like if you're designing t-shirts in Japan and you're going to print them in Indonesia, and then, or you're going to print them in Great Britain and Indonesia, and then they're all these different garments are going to show up to New York. Are they going to match, right? Are you going to print something in New York on top of these things? So it's a way of being able to utilize the same colors no matter where you are. And the two differences I just wanted to point out were the two different types of printing, even though we're not obviously doing any printing at all anyway, but there is offset printing, which is kind of like what we did in class, right? It's just you send a file to a printer and it prints the whole image. So ink is kind of mixed. Whereas process colors, this is a way to send something through a printer one after another. And they do this a lot of times for like printing shirts, for an example. If anybody's ever been to a printing place, a printing studio. The process here would be you print like your lightest color first, you let it dry, or you run it through a process that it cures it quicker, and then you print your subsequent colors over top of it. until you get to your darkest color or black or something like that. And it's a layering process, right? Kind of like if anybody's done traditional printmaking, like a wood block or something. So yeah, this project we are just going to use RGB. We're all on screens. We're not going to be printing anything. So we're switching up color spaces. And then I got a couple different types of like movements to cover. Some other little bit of technical stuff at the end. But so this is kind of getting into a little bit more of what your project's going to be on, you know, kind of thinking more clearly and more in depth for this project than we did in the first. The first is more like have some kind of general idea and then mess around with images and see what you can do with Photoshop creatively. We're still going to aim to be creative here in this design project, but we want to be more specific and potentially more clever, right, in our designs. So, and again, I usually ask this question in class. I'm not going to ask many questions on here because people, most of you don't seem to be as engaged digitally, so just kind of forego that. So kind of thinking like who pays for art, right? I don't know, right? People. Well, what kind of people? Well, what kind of art is it? Is it a print at a store that a poster you're gonna put on your wall? And a consumer would pay for that, right? But and this could be any art, you know, a sculpture piece, some kind of woodworking, whatever. But in the past, you know, like a couple hundred years ago, you know, 300-400 years ago even, who pays for art? Well, it wasn't consumers. There wasn't really a thing called consumers back then, right? It was the people that paid for art were the rich, or the church, right? Wealthy people. So people that have power, people that have money. And those people ended up defining what art should be, what art was produced, right? If you're an artist 400 years ago, you're not making art for fun. You might enjoy doing it as a craft. Maybe you've been lucky enough to choose that as your profession. But in the end, you're still not making things that you enjoy. At least that's not what's been remembered. Maybe you made stuff that gets thrown away or burned or whatever. But in the end, you know, kings are going to get portraits of themselves. They're going to get portraits of their families. The church is going to get religious depictions of Christ or something, right? So it's been really limited over time until more modern eras where people kind of came together, defied their governments, kind of overthrew these rulers, these dictators, and wanted something better for themselves. And then once people started being able to retain their own economic means, such as artists, they were able to start venturing out and creating more things that they are interested in to sell for a profit rather than getting commissions by other people. So the first big movement here was modernism, obviously. Kind of, and on the right you can kind of see this is a really earlier one where art was used to kind of push for this modern period where people have their own power, not just the ruling class has the power. And stemming out of that, this is like late, it really became a poignant in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And modernism itself, as a period, a movement, it rejected historical and tradition and cultural traditions, and it's trying to like uphold this value with normal people, normal humans being able to make, improve, reshape their environments. Kind of other areas would be like aiding in scientific knowledge and technology, experimentation. These are all things that weren't really too pronounced before this period, right? It's kind of things we take for granted if you think about it. So, and I want to really make sure you're all understanding that modernism isn't to say that this isn't like the current era. It's not contemporary, right? This was like 100 plus years ago, pushing 150 years or something. So you want to be thinking of modernism as a specific time, a period in history. It's like a movement. It's not. You shouldn't be thinking of it as like contemporary, but in reality, it did lead toward the modern, contemporary era. But so stemming out of the modernistic movement, we end up having schools that start to educate people in this way, right? And 1926 is the year that the first school was established. And this movement or this style of this Bauhaus is what pretty much every art program, art school is designed by now. So, like, if it wasn't for the Bauhaus, like, we might not have the same structure of class that we're doing right now. And the Bauhaus kind of combine, like, in the past, and this is still seen in some different places around the world. I've never been, but from what previous instructors have told me and different students is like the one big one I've used in the past is like people in China or in some places in Japan. The way of learning art there has been more traditionalized still, where you go through like 3 years of learning the traditional means of drawing, and really just spending adequate time on perfecting that trait of traditional drawing, traditional means of expression, and then in your final year you get to decide what your specific focus is going to be on, and then you shift to that area after you've had this traditional background set up. So the Bauhaus takes that and throws it out the window. From day one, it focuses on what the students, what the people are energized by, right? Like, why are they there? What are their interests? Why do they want to do these things? And they specifically allow not just for that to happen, but they also are pushing together multiple disciplines within the same building. So, these people are doing projects on couple students are doing projects on sculpture, another student's doing some kind of project relating to some scientific means, another one's doing engineering or architecture, kind of taking all these different components and mashing them together and seeing what happens, right? Experimenting. And like I said, this has been the model for pretty much every art school kind of coming out of this school. Post-Structuralism. This was a linguistics movement that happened in the 60s and 70s. And it wasn't necessarily an art movement, which is why I don't have any images here. This is really like a change in thought. And let's see. It is the methodology that implies elements of human culture that must be understood by way of their relationship to a broader overarching system or structure. So it's really defining a structure and then abiding by that structure. And that was also used as a creative means of expression or generating, something creatively. And the example here I have put up is language itself. If you analyze language, like, how do you describe language? Right? There's no this meta language. There's no other way of describing language other than using language to describe itself, right? It's kind of like a simple thought, but it's also kind of profound when you think about it. So it's analyzing these structures and kind of basing your work on a specific thought process. And then coming out of that, we have post-structuralism, which was literally trying to undermine the claims that were developed by the structuralists and kind of like testing the waters, Maybe it was like all these people set up these rules and thoughts and other people didn't agree with them. So the post-structuralists really came out and tried to kind of get rid of a lot of that crap that was lingering and refine it. And this is a famous example here. So I just want to also give another quick point I forgot to read here. So post-structuralists, their approach argues that to understand an object, such as text, it is necessary to study both the object itself and the systems of knowledge that produced the object. The systems of knowledge that produced the object, right? So what is I know some of you already have seen this image and they know what this is, but those of you who have not seen this image and you don't know what this is, / you don't speak French, what is this image? What is this image of? You might be thinking, oh, it's a stupid pipe. Duh. Well, the text is literally saying this is not a pipe. Because in reality, that original image right there was a painting of a pipe. It was not an actual pipe, right? And now it's a digital converted image of a pipe that was then, reorganized, sent over the internet, and now you're looking at a screen. So it's not a pipe. It's not an image of a pipe. It's, I guess it's still an image of a pipe in the end. But this is what it's trying to get at is there's a structure, there's knowledge. How is this image produced? And this isn't the only example, but it's a very well-known one. Trying to undermine these structures and really point things out. And then we get into more of the more famous, the original modernistic movement, I guess, modernism. There was things that are also very famous, like Picasso. But I really want to focus on this area here because I find that you guys will probably have a lot of good inspirational points from the postmodern movement. And in general, it's just more closely associated to our ongoing efforts nowadays. This became this began sometime in the 1970s, and it aimed to contradict various elements of modernism. So the different types of areas of exploration here were intermedia. So you can think of that as like sculptural found objects and paint, maybe, right? That's intermedia. Different types of media intertwine. Another one would be installation art, right? You take a room, you fill it with a bunch of stuff, you design like a statement about it, and then people explore the space, right? Installation art is temporary. There's also conceptual based art, which is literally could be conceptual art. What's a really good example of this? Why am I blanking on this example? I've seen the image in person, or the well, I guess it's not the original anymore, but I've seen one of the original conceptual based artworks. I'm just blanking on what the hell it was now. I think one of the subsequent ones was a wine, like a bottle rack for like drying bottles. So you probably aren't too familiar with what that would be, but if you're gonna save bottles and dry them out and recycle them, if you're going through a lot of bottles, they actually made like a rack where it's like a metal pole with these little prongs sticking off of it, so you can put a bottle upside down and let it drain out and dry. But anyway, now I remember as I'm talking through this. So this bottle rack or a urinal was also used. Literally just an object, right? Taken, brought into a gallery, plopped down. This is art. What is, and then there's this whole conversation about what art is and is it really art? So this is another area about conceptual art. And this is another realm to really realize, like, this isn't relating to something like post-contemporary, right? We're not trying to fight against what is contemporary and what's not, or this is literally just another term for labeling the era, postmodern era. And then we get into all this kind of vocab, grammar kind of stuff. This is just points that I have on the vocab sheet. I also use to put on a quiz. You have all this stuff in terms of vocabulary. These are like, obviously seems pretty straightforward, but again, it's just kind of going through a mental structure of organizing how we're talking about design. So all these vocab terms, these are like the most simplistic pieces that you would be utilizing to create something, right? Like, a line, right? That's one component. Whereas grammar, all these different components here, like movement, or how well is an image balanced. These are relating to multiple components, like juxtaposing one from another and how they're laid out. So most usually when we talk about things, it's based on grammar, but it's all built up with all these individual components, obviously. Right. So I just had a couple of different examples here. Let's see. Can I go back? Right. So this first one is thinking about what type of grammar are these being associated with. This first one is just balance, right? Because it's offset on the page, is not front and center. Notice how we're cutting off the edges of these circles, but it still works, right? This still works as a design because you have information down in the corner. Whereas this is all centered, everything's within the border, So this one could be considered more formal, right? And this one could be considered informal because you're cutting pieces off. Both are completely acceptable. It depends on what you're striving for. The second one is just based on unity and harmony because it's unifying all these same components. Everything relating to a guitar, music, being a musician, right? And it's actually an advertisement for some kind of equalizer or some kind of digital tool, but this one is based on movement. We have these different pieces that are, in sequence, one after another. You could tell they kind of fell out from this candy container. But because they are sprawled out like this, you know that they did have movement, right? There was this sense that they had moved. So it's kind of utilizing that sensation in your own images. Last one is proportion. Obviously, this dandelion head is not this big compared to somebody's face, right? But you don't even really think about it. It just is there. It's working. And you could utilize that as a structure of organizing. So kind of just some different examples of how we could be orienting different pieces to design something. Everything doesn't have to be front and center, squared off, right? And this applies to text as well. A lot of people don't really focus on text as much as they do images, but this project is going to be focusing on text as image. So really not thinking about images themselves as much as possible in this project. We're trying to focus on type. And realistically, like the more of you that can do a project without any images at all, I'd be happier for it. So it is challenging, but taking these principles of how images are structured, like her head's off the frame, this other piece is larger than her face. You could be thinking of those same kinds of principles with using type too, right? What if this was like a letter E right here, a lowercase e, this large, right? I kind of instilled these thoughts with every class, and I still haven't had many students do this, like expand type to be that large as one example. So I'm trying to focus on it a little bit more maybe. And these, I don't even know why the slide's on here. If this was like a first project maybe, but okay, so this is getting into some kinds of typography terminologies. And again, these are all on the vocab sheet, so I urge you guys to check that out. Go through and, if you can, print it off, highlight stuff, whatever, kind of whatever you do to learn better. But these are all things we're going to be focusing on in terms of our exercise, but also then how could you translate some of those into your project. And obviously spacing, different types of classifications of type. So I should probably have a slide for some of these actually, so you get a better visual. Anyway, there's two types of type. Well, not really. There's multiple, but there's two main types that you guys will use in your daily lives. These are sans serif and serif typefaces. Serif is literally like the little hooks that you could find off of the edges of letters. Maybe I should just pull up an example, maybe. So as you can see, this T right here has a serif on it, right? These little chunks. versus sans serif that does not have any of those, right? Pretty straightforward. So there's types that do use serif and there's types that don't use serif. And that's all this is getting at here. Um, Then these ones on the right are the only ones else that I think are pertinent here to talk about. The X height, the Y height, these are just pertaining to like the dimensions of the like letter forms themselves, right? I mean, you could talk about a whole word if you wanted to, but I think focusing on a single letter makes more sense. And we'll review all of these components when we get to the exercise on Wednesday. Which reminds me, make sure everybody before Wednesday as well that you download and install Illustrator. Make sure you have that running so that we can walk through the exercise. The body size, like changing the height or the width of something, is usually considered informal, and you should avoid doing it as much as possible. And the reason being is that, you know, people spend a lot of time designing type and typefaces so that you're kind of like upholding that as like a found object almost, where you retain, if you're retaining the original identity of the letter of the work that somebody else put into it, that's kind of why you want to be avoiding changing the height and width of a shape, or of a, I say shape, but of a letter or words or type in general. And actually, the term that I learned of what this is, like professionally, from my professor when I went to school, like the art and design school at Alfred University. This is considered bastardizing type. When you take something and you change it from its original source. So it's always best to avoid like bastardizing type if you can. And the way to do that would be pick a different type that works more towards like what your purposes are. So, and again, we're talking about like stretching out letters, right? Rather than stretching out a letter, you find a type that it looks more stretched out already, and then you're using that type. Letting and kerning, those are like how much space you have between your letters and between your lines. And again, we'll check that out next class, and it's in your vocab. This is very critical for like layout publishing, and really if you're designing anything for reading, primarily for reading, so like magazine, even a lot of text on a poster for an event or something, you want to be really utilizing your letting and kerning so that it's I guess more pleasing on your eye and how you want the information to be organized and visualized. Baseline is literally just like where your letters sit on top of. So when you learn to write in like first grade, second grade, any of your descenders that go under the line can go under, like your G, right? A Y. Ascenders would be anything that go up over the middle, kind of like dotted line, right? Like capital letters, L's, F's, D's. So your baseline is literally where everything rests on. And we'll look at that a little bit more in depth as well. And then ligatures, these aren't super critical. But even here, you can almost see that this A and G in ligature is like really close to touching one another. If they were touching at all, that would be considered a ligature in general because they are fused together. And normally most people don't ever use these, but you do see them. Like, I think the logo for American Eagle might be like AE, not the full name spelled out, but AE is a ligature. Like, you guys have probably seen that as an example. But these are used a lot in different languages as well, just not in English. You could create your own ligature in your own design if you wanted to, right? Like, I'll give you another example of a ligature. My logo right here, that's the ligatures. It's my lowercase b, capital A, lowercase d. That's my initials. I just shoved them together, right? And this took me many years to develop, literally several hundred iterations, but finally came together in that form. So ligatures can be powerful. Take something out of the ordinary maybe, but it's still legible because it's type. You can read it still. And then this is also something that I want to make sure that you guys understand. And every semester, I'd say 80% of the projects that are submitted still don't grasp what this is or why this is important. And I end up docking them, like 5 or 10 points or something like that on their projects. Because they're not understanding how to harness type properly. And the one thing that we all have to acknowledge working on this project is that type itself is not melded with the program you're using. You install type. So depending on what typefaces you have installed, you have access to on your machine. However, if you send this project file to somebody else who does not have the type you're using, maybe you have a more premium version of Illustrator and somebody else has an old version of Illustrator and they never bought all these extra typefaces, or they don't have access to these typefaces. Those people would not be able to see your design in the same way you're seeing it. It would basically replace your type with a similar type or any other type. So say like a script typeface is like real formally like wedding, like wedding scripty, like you're doing calligraphy or something. Say if you have some script typeface that I don't have and you send me your project, it'll replace it with probably just like a sans serif block type, which is clearly not the way you envisioned your image to look, right? So there's two ways to go about this. I'm going to say it now. I'll say it on the demo day. I'm going to say it again later in terms of like submitting, and I'll still have people not do this correctly for some reason. When you share a file with somebody that has type, number one, you need to either rasterize it or vectorize it, right? So this program, you would be translating type into these vector points, and it's no longer type that you can like type on the keyboard with or delete a character. It would be transferring it into shapes, right? That's one way. Or another way would be include your type like when you submit your file. That way when I open up your file and it's like, oh, I don't have this script typeface. How do I look at this image? Oh, they included the type for me. I could then install this typeface. And that's what this is here. You guys are seeing on the screen. Font book. So if you're on a Mac right now, you could literally just go up to your search bar and just search for font book. It's a program on your computer, and you essentially can like just drag and drop you just drag and drop stuff in here, and it'll install that font onto your computer itself, and then you have access to using that font in any program that you're using. It's that streamlined now. It used to be more complicated. So I urge people to ask questions when it comes time to like submitting your projects so that you're doing it the right way. This is a really technical piece, but this is even still applying to Photoshop. Like a lot of you submitted projects that had some type in there. Some of them I didn't have the type and it didn't show up the right way. So in that regard, I still can like reference your image with your PDF, your other image that you submitted. But yeah, it's a big problem to make sure you're grasping how to use type properly. So hopefully after this project, you're all going to be much more savvy with it. Anybody have any questions on the lecture here? If not, I'm going to dive into introducing our project here. After I get a drink of water. I talk more on lecture days than I do like the whole rest of the week because, it's like we're in isolation. Actually, give me 1 second too. Somebody tried calling me during the lecture. I'm going to make sure they... Okay. So this project here, I just want to point out, number one, at the bottom, I already have the rubric. I think it has the old date, an older date on it, but whatever. Like we're not spring, but it's like essentially the same exact project, although I will say that it won't have the print, print stuff, obviously. Yeah, and somebody else tried to call me again, even though I told them I'm teaching. So yeah, there's not going to be a print, but this is like a form so you guys can see how I'm grading everything. If you want to just make sure you're abiding by things, also here, just like the first project. And the project 3, I also put the grade sheet up for that, so you guys can check that out if you want to double check everything. But this project, we're going to be focusing on type, as you can see, and more specifically, type as image, using type to form an image. And there's many ways of doing this. As you can see in this kind of like tree-like one, this is just throwing a bunch of text on a screen, arranging it, overlaying it to create some kind of visual. Here we're using trailing type with outlines and like a background to kind of create an image. This is less type as image, but it still kind of works. This is more in the boat of image. We literally can see what the word is up top almost completely without even reading anything in the dark here. But then this kind of finalizes the letter forms, right? Like an E right here. And it applies to the theme that they're going for. And then there's also type as image here, which is in the background. So there's tons of examples in the previous student example folder. So again, that's on the main site here. If you guys want to check out other projects. But anyway, diving in here. So you're going to design a work that speaks out on an issue involving politics and technology. And we're in a pretty crazy political climate right now. So I'm assuming a lot of you will probably lean towards the pandemic-related content. That's fine. However, I almost want to suggest that if you're not deeply passionate about it, like you're not going to, like if you're going to create this image and then share it with people and they're going to print it and yada yada, it's like, okay, it's probably passionate enough to want to do the project. Otherwise, it's a pretty frustrating time for everybody. It's stressful. Maybe you know people have gotten sick or passed. Like, it's rough. But I almost urge you to think about things that maybe are more uplifting and more inspirational rather than as kind of a negative mindset, you know? So by politics and technology, this doesn't mean like computers only or the internet and, you know, Republican, Democrat. And that's the only things you could be doing. Quite frankly, I'd love it to see all of you work on individual projects that are all of your own different interests that don't relate to, you know, American government politics and mainstream, you know, like Twitter and Trump. Again, I'm ruling that off for everybody because if I don't, then I'll have like 10 projects on it for some reason. And I get it. Like people are outraged and, you know, they want to voice their opinions. I get it. It's just when there's so many people doing the same project, it ends up being like a comparison of the projects rather than a focus on the, you know, what's working well, kind of focusing on individual pieces that are building up this image. It ends up being comparing images, and I want to make sure we're trying to stay away from that. So you want to be thinking about things like, you know, maybe you have nieces and nephews and their parents are struggling to keep them interested in school. Well, a political battle could be like, you know, this whole mindset of teaching children in general. You know, who gets to say what kids learn and why they should learn it? That's a political component right there. Technology could be like a hammer. A hammer is technology. You know, we watched that first video. What is technology? Like everything. We're mediated now, right? And so that's why I'm urging you guys like to think outside the box. Think of what things you're interested in, right? Are you interested in video games? If so, don't just say video games. What specifically about video games are you interested in, right? The form factor of being able to play with people from a distance. What's another thing for video games? Cognition. Maybe that's building up like ability to problem solve or solve puzzles or, you know. So it's kind of thinking more, focusing in more on a specific component rather than being really, you know, global warming. Yeah, you could do global warming and you could show a globe and a fire under it or something. But that's like really, it's like it's been seen a billion times before. Is it really like your most important interest? I don't know, right? So, and again, you guys are going to be able to like watch Helvetica and stem more ideas on how to formalize an image, like structure something. But the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is solidifying your concept before you think of at all what the image is going to look like, right? I wouldn't be thinking at all on visually what's going on. You want to think about your idea and how are you pushing that idea across to everybody else. Let's see. Okay. So yeah. Keep diving in here. Oh, this is wrong. It's not vocab 3, but whatever. Vocab 5. So your image has to be functioning on 2 levels. Text as image and image as text. And most people get confused about this. And people get confused about this, and they're not really sure what this exactly means. So I found actually a pretty good reference from AIGA. AIGA itself is a design site, a group actually, and they focus on type. So this site alone, you can go down through and find a lot of graphic visual examples of type and their use. But in general, this kind of blog entry here, or post, is about type as image and what does that mean. And so I thought I'd post this if anybody's really confused. You can kind of go on here and read down through, and maybe this will give you a little bit more of a mindset to be kind of moving forward. It's pretty lengthy, so I wouldn't say you need to read the whole thing, but scroll down through and kind of browse through what it's talking about. I also posted some other sites that are relating to design and type. Wired is one that I actually subscribed to for several years. I kind of miss not having it. It's nice to be able to kind of lay around, bring this with you to read every once in a while. But they have a lot of interesting topics about technology. So I think it'd be pertinent to a lot of you. Maybe even subscribe to that one, I would suggest. Also, different magazines that focus on type I've posted here. So you can go through and kind of browse their archives. MoMA has a page for design itself. And so this is kind of thinking about the overarching principles of design, not specifically type. And then obviously student examples is there as well. Let me go back up here. So, and I guess just trying to clarify. I'm not saying that your type has to take the form of an object or an easily recognizable element, like let's see. I'm just randomly doing a search. Let's see if there's a Apple ball. Man, I'm killing it right now. Okay, we're gonna avoid doing that. But this is kind of like, piecing individual letters up and changing the colors, and that's one way of working, and you can work that way. I'm not saying you have to. You could put text on lines and weave the lines and create some kind of image that way. That's another way of working as text as image. Again, very large letter forms that sprawl like past the page, and you're utilizing them in some kind of way to overlay or to contrast something. That's another way of visualizing type as image. So I'm not saying there's any one particular way you have to work. And again, after you watch this movie, you're gonna start piecing things together. So I'd say like the first thing you'll do is for Project 4 is you'll want to watch the movie first, respond to the blog post I have for it, and then look through a lot of different resources and images, and you should be able to generate some kind of project based on your interests, I would think, at this point in the semester. And then once you have your project proposal submitted, then you can really start to harvest images as references. And what I mean by references is not like Photoshop, how we grabbed a ton of images and we brought them into the program to use as the exported final image. I'm saying go out and grab images as inspiration, right? You go out and find something, you're like, oh, I'm really attracted to how this word looks on this page, and I don't know why, but I really like it. Save that image in a folder, right? And as you go along, you're going to accumulate all this stuff, and you're going to start to realize, like, oh, you know what? I don't really like these other ones I thought I liked as much. And then after you have like a dozen, 2 dozen images that you're really interested in, you can start to pull cues of like why you like them and combine different elements. And your project can stem, that's one way of working, right? Your project can stem from all these sources that you find interesting. And when you're going through and writing your proposal, I put some questions here as reference of like, why are you making this, right? Design is all based on being specific and delivering a message, right? And so what is your message? And so like, who's your client? Is this for like 7-year-olds trying to get them to like wash their hands? Is this why you're making this image? Or is it for retirees? Is it for college age people? Why, right? So then the content's going to be focusing on that demographic. What are you communicating? What are they hiring you to say? Like, as if somebody's hiring you to make this, what are you trying to educate people with, right? I guess that's kind of the same thing as communicating. Who is saying this message to? Man, I guess I have to revise this list. It's kind of redundant. What visual attitude? Do you want to make people feel happy, sad? Do you want them to feel like they are empowered? Like, okay, now I get this, I can do this. Or, like the army poster that shows a woman with her arm flexing, like, yeah, we can do this. It's instilling this notion of empowerment, right? And confidence. So there's a lot to dive into here, and I'm really just making sure I go over a lot of different components so that you guys are starting to think that this project is a lot less experimental and playful and abstract. It can be those things, but at the same time, the core component is going to be, we're going to look at this work, we're going to be able to see what's going on, and we're going to be able to read it because it's type-based. And through that, within a quick 1 to 3 seconds, we're going to get like, oh, this project is on this topic, and this topic is telling me something, right? We should be able to grasp that right off the bat. And then from there should also be some kind of subsequent information that we get, right? So like, what's an example? Global warming is bleaching our coral reefs. Okay, something like that. So start recycling, whatever, stop the kill of coral reefs. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And then, or maybe the whole thing is like, global warming is causing coral reefs to be bleached. That's the main focus. Then subsequently, you could have information on like how to prevent this from happening, right? Maybe it's an educational piece. Maybe it's political based, where you're trying to get people to reach out to their political ambassadors, right? Like, hey, you should be changing these laws. So it's really just taking something you're passionate about, something that's relating to technology and politics, and then figuring out why you want to make this, and kind of crafting it from there. So I'm hoping this is making sense. And again, there's not a lot of visuals I showed you guys, so I'm assuming a lot of you are probably still a little confused, but I really like having Helvetica, you guys to watch Helvetica, because it is really insightful. So yeah. Anybody have questions on the project? We'll start there. And actually, I don't know if anybody's been saying anything. I hope you've all heard me fine.
Let me make a check-in.
Okay, I was making sure I can still hear. No questions?
Not yet.
Okay. And apparently nobody has... I was wanting for people to post if they have questions on their project. Project 3, but I don't see anybody having that yet either. But anyway, okay, so no project 4 questions as of right now. Anybody need help on project 3 still? I'm assuming a lot of people should, but I have no idea.
I kind of just need help, like, thinking of new stuff to do. Like, I know we did I took notes when we did our demos,
Yep.
but as into, like, how to start, like, moving my background image, and, yeah, basically it, because I don't know how I would move the whole background image without messing with the whole setup frame.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll say that if anybody needs help or has questions on this new project, stick around. Figure out what you're going to ask me and ask me. If anybody has stuff they want to go over for the processing project, also stick around. If you don't have any questions and you just need to work, you're good to hop off and just start watching that movie or whatever you need to do. So yeah, class is over unless you have questions. So okay, so you're wondering how to move a background. Is what you're asking, Peter?
Yeah, basically just how to. Yeah, so you know how like in Photoshop when we do kind of like the pinch or the